The door was already ajar when Maya reached the cabin, the legal envelope still warm in her hand. A retired literature teacher, steady by habit, she paused at the threshold and listened to the woods hold their breath. Inside, dust motes floated like ash. The neighbor said no one had been in here since 1978. The deed said otherwise. Across town, her cousin had already called a lawyer. Contest the probate, he threatened. If there's anything valuable, it's not yours alone. Maya didn't argue. She couldn't. Her savings had thinned to a thread under medical bills and a mortgage that no longer cared she was widowed. This cabin felt like the last square of ground under her feet. In the smallest bedroom, a floorboard refused to lie. Its nails were bright, too bright for a place left to rot. She pressed her palm to it and felt a faint breath of colder air whisper through the scene. Someone had opened this room long after 1978. Someone had closed it again. The cabin belonged to a grandfather nobody spoke about. The silence around his name was its own kind of map. Tonight, Maya decided she would follow it. What happens when an ordinary life brushes a hidden edge? For Maya Jensen, 62 and newly retired, it began with a certified letter that mispronounced her name. Congratulations, it read. Sole heir to a woodland parcel in Iron Ridge County. The signature belonged to an attorney she'd never met. The property belonged to a man her mother had refused to name. Maya lived in a small house that remembered laughter. She packed a thermos, a flashlight, and the habit of making lists, and drove 2 hours into a county where the map recoiled into green. The road turned to gravel, then memory. The cabin leaned into a stand of hemlocks, roof line sagging like a tired shoulder. An orange notice flapped on the door, delinquent taxes. She folded it carefully and kept it. Proof of a beginning. The neighbor, Eli, met her at the fence with a cautious nod. People come and go up here, he said, setting the cadence of a man who liked to be right once. Last winter I saw a light in there, thought it was trespassers. By the time I grabbed my boots, it was gone. He looked past her toward the trees. Folks say the old man left in 78. No one came after. Her mother had never said his name. Your grandfather made choices, she'd offered once, and the way the word choices bent made Maya understand it meant damage. At the funeral, the silence had been careful, like a glass kept from the edge of the table. Now, standing in the stale air of the front room, Maya understood that silence had mass. She moved like she was in a library, cataloging without touching. A tin of nails on the mantel, a coffee cup with the hairline crack. On a shelf, a first edition with penciled marginalia that curled like vines. The writing was neat, old-fashioned, and unafraid of the margin lines. She traced the indent with the fingertip and felt the old teacher in her wake. The practical problems announced themselves in a parade. Taxes, repairs. A cousin named Alan who had already texted, "If there's anything valuable, I'll see you in court." He'd never visited her when she was caring for her husband during chemo. He had perfect timing now. She should sell the structure for lumber, she thought. Pay what she owed, keep the small house that was more memory than wood. Identity argued back. There were questions here that had been waiting for her. In the kitchen, she pulled a drawer that stuck at 3 inches. She jiggled, coaxed, and found it had been blocked from beneath by a strip of tape hardened to amber. She slid a butter knife under it and lifted free a child's crayon drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands under a green hill, a square with smoke, a cabin, and a crooked sun. In careful adult printing at the top, The Last Promise. In the bottom corner, a date, 1978. She didn't know whose hand had written the title. She knew that last is a word children don't reach for unless they've heard adults use it first. She turned the paper and felt a tack hole in one corner, the round memory of where it had once hung. Dusk pressed its thumbs into the windows. She clicked on her flashlight and followed the beam to the small bedroom down the hall. The floorboards carried 2 histories, one gray with age, the other a single plank just off color, slightly proud of the rest. The nails there flashed silver. She knelt, set her palm flat, and felt the whisper of colder air creeping through the seam. A draft means a void. A void means a decision. She tested the board gently. It flexed but held, the way a truth does when it's almost ready to be told. The thing about human nature is we pretend we want answers until we hold the first fragile edge. Then we decide whether we are the kind of person who pulls. Maya sat back on her heels and let the room settle. She noted the nail pattern, the slight misalignment, the way the baseboard trim interrupted in an unnatural rhythm. Her grandfather's name lived in the space between those nails. She could feel it. Outside, wind combed the trees. Inside, a retired teacher counted consequences. If she opened the floor and found nothing, she would still owe taxes and sleep worse. If she opened it and found something, Alan would come with papers. If she left it closed, the silence would continue to own them. She folded the drawing along its old crease and slipped it into the inner pocket of her coat. Then she said, quietly, to a house that had been waiting, "I'm going to pull." As the door closed behind her, the cabin seemed to listen. Maya set down her thermos, rolled up her sleeves, and did what she knew. She made a system. She numbered rooms, sketched a rough floor plan on a yellow pad, and began cataloging like a librarian who'd found a misfiled century. Every object earned a line: tin of nails, enamel mug, wool blanket with a cigarette singe at the fringe. She spoke aloud, a habit from years of teaching. Saying things made them real. Numbers made them manageable. The ledger appeared on a high shelf behind a coil of fishing line. Brown cloth cover, frayed spine. Inside, neat columns dated through the mid-70s, milk, flour, carbide, soap. Then, the tween grocery entries, single lines in a different hand slanted tighter. At first they looked like notes, but the spacing was too regular. The vocabulary avoided common letters. A substitution cipher. She taught the gold bug to bored sophomores. She smiled, small and involuntary, at the familiar puzzle wearing a new face. She copied the odd lines into her notebook, marking frequencies, hunting the shape of E. The thing about codes, people keep their rhythms even when they're trying not to. After an hour, patterns emerged like bones under skin. The first phrase surfaced. The foundation shifts, the heart does not. She felt it land, weighty and simple, a clue that was also a credo. Eli's boots sounded on the path at dusk. He stood on the porch, hat in his hands. "Heard a coyote earlier," he said. "Figured I'd check." She thanked him and saw his eyes flick past her shoulder into the dim room. "Last winter, those lights?" she asked. He nodded. Quick. Like someone didn't want to be seen. "You be careful up here. People hear inheritance, they get ideas." On her phone, a new email blinked from Alan's attorney. "Provide inventory of all assets located on property within 10 days. Failure to comply will result in motion for injunctive relief." She read it twice, not for meaning, which was clear, but for tone. People who write like that expect fear to do their work. Her pen hovered over the notebook, then moved. Inventory, in progress. When the wind rose, the cabin seam spoke. She followed the ledger to the staircase where the newel post cap wobbled under her palm. Old wood tolerates a little give. This felt like an invitation. She twisted gently. The cap slid, revealing a brass tube tucked inside the hollow. She lifted it free. Inside, a rolled map of the property, the edges browned and satin soft with handling. 3 hand-drawn X's punctured the quiet. In the margin, tiny notes in pencil, notations that read like poetry when divorced from their original purpose. Where the water runs stubborn, the stone remembers. When the north wind bites, follow the ash. Her grandfather's marginalia had the same small confidence. She placed the map beside the ledger and felt the world tilt a fraction toward coherence. Before she could choose which X to tempt, rain shouldered the roof, the kind that erases distances. She decided on the closest mark, near a cedar snag behind the cabin. The ground gave grudgingly under her trowel. 8 inches down, metal chirped against metal. She cleared dirt with her fingers until a glass jar resolved, sealed with wax gone the color of old teeth. Inside, a rusted key floated in dry air like a relic in a reliquary. Back inside, she dried the jar with a towel and pried the seal with care. The key came free with the tiniest surrendering sound. Ornate bow, teeth pitted, shaft straight. She tried every obvious lock, the front door, the padlock on the shed, a metal box under the sink. Nothing accepted it. She set it next to the ledger, an unanswered question with weight. The cipher's next line yielded slower, then all at once. Ash marks the fork, but the hearth holds the heart. She pictured the stone fireplace, its dark throat and iron grate. The foundation shifts, the heart does not. Hearth, heart. A teacher's fondness for word kinships clicked in her chest. Her phone buzzed again. A photo message from a number she didn't know. A blurry shot of her car in the cabin drive, taken from the trees. No text, no context. She felt the small, practical fear that keeps animals alive. She locked the front door and checked the windows, then laughed once at herself because the locks were older than she was, and the person in the trees was not a raccoon. She stood in front of the fireplace with her flashlight and watched the beam skim irregularities. One stone, low and left of center, had a hairline gap twice as wide as its neighbors. Soot had not darkened its edges as deeply. The split whispered utility, not accident. She fetched a cold chisel from the toolbox and wedged it into the seam. The stone shifted a quarter inch, resisted, then lifted with a weight that argued against haste. She braced, lifted, and set it aside. Beneath, an oilcloth-wrapped bundle sat in a shallow cavity cut into packed earth. The smell that rose was older than she was, mineral and leaf and time. She lifted the bundle and unwrapped it. A small tin appeared, the kind that once held lozenges, and beneath it, a folded paper gone thin with years. Inside the tin, a second key, smaller, brighter, with 2 teeth instead of 3. The folded paper had writing in that steady hand. Key 1 opens the cabin. 2 opens the truth. Thunder rolled the length of the ridge. Lightning granted a second of day. Headlights flashed in the trees, a long blink of intrusion, then dark. She went to the window and saw nothing but rain hatching the night. Her phone found no signal. The cabin shrank and deepened, both. She held both keys like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. The map lay open, the third X waiting with a patience that felt like pressure. The well cap on the north side of the house entered her mind unbidden, the iron ring welded onto its plate, the way the map's second X had hovered just over that circle. The foundation shifts, the heart does not. The hearth had given its secret. The heart could be water. Maya sat on the hearthstone, the tin warm in her hand from her own heat. She wrote on her yellow pad, "Tomorrow, well. Tonight, stay." Across the room, the child's drawing rested on the mantel, the crooked sun hovering over a square with smoke. The title glowed in the beam of her light. The Last Promise, like a directive. She doused the fire she had not lit, collected the ledger, the map, the keys, and the tin, and set them in the canvas bag near her feet. The cabin creaked, not with menace, but with the acceptance of a next step chosen. The thing about human nature is once you start solving a code, you stop pretending you can put it down. As the storm deepened, the cabin's heartbeat settled into the rain. Maya checked the chisel scars on the hearth opening, then slid a hand into the cavity again, sweeping along the cut earth. Her fingertips hit the corner of something rigid. Not stone, metal. She eased the object forward and felt the give of oilcloth tight as a drum over tin. She set the bundle on the rug and unwrapped it with the care of turning a fragile page. Inside lay a pocket journal bound in cracked brown leather, a folded bank receipt with a red stamp, and a photograph gone silver at the edges. The receipt bore a bank's name she recognized from an old advertisement, and a box number written twice, as if to anchor it. The stamp read sealed. The photograph showed a man in his 40s beside the cabin, his eyes narrowed against sun, his mouth set in the careful line of someone who'd stopped smiling for cameras. She opened the journal. The first page breathed dust and something like tobacco. The handwriting matched the marginalia in the book on the shelf. Upright, measured, a person who believed in the weight of his own words. March 5th, 1978, it began. If you are reading, I failed to return when I promised. Maya read with the slow hunger of a teacher who'd waited for a student to finally speak. The entries unscrolled a life she'd only ever been warned away from. He wrote about a mining co-op, men and women pooling what they had to buy into a claim on county land when corporations walked away. They were idealists, he said, and the ore had been real enough to make them bold. Then pressure arrived with city shoes and quiet threats. Partners turned. A man named Cowley brought outsiders to protect shipments. When dissent flared, fists followed. One night that spring, a robbery staged to look like justice left a friend dead on the ground and a safe ripped open. I took our share before they could launder it into their own pockets. I took it not from my pocket, but to keep the weight of blood off our name, he wrote. I swore to bring it back when the men with polished boots found another place to shine. The law would not help us. The law had already chosen the men with clean fingernails, so I chose the long road. Maya's breath shortened. The bank receipts box number pulsed in her palm. The journal moved between confession and instruction in the steady cadence of a man who knew time might end his sentence. He wrote of hiding assets in layers, bearer bonds safe from casual fire, assay certificates proving the co-op's legal interests, a letter notarized by a church deacon brave enough to sign. He wrote of the map and the X's, of how the well's throat could hide what a floorboard could never keep if a mob came with crowbars. He never used the word theft. He used the words held in trust. He did not justify, but he described the ledger of harm, balancing what he could. I could not protect your mother from my absence, he wrote. I chose secrecy over presence, thinking I could be both guardian and ghost. That is cowardice dressed as strategy. He wrote her mother's name 4 times in those pages, like a penance. Headlights swept the trees again, slow, then gone. She forced herself not to stand, not to break the reading's thread. The storm would draw watchers as surely as fear would. She kept moving through the pages. A code phrase surfaced in the middle entries, its letters spaced wider than the rest. Key 1 opens the cabin. 2 opens the truth. She looked at the tin on the hearth and understood why the first key had felt ceremonial, while the second meant rupture. Near the journal's center, a page had been thumbed more than its neighbors. She recognized the habit, the place a writer returns to argue with himself. The entry there was shorter, halting. If you ever see Alan's father at my door, do not open. He is not here for you. He is here for what he believes is his. He will say family. He will mean possession. If he brings a lawyer, bring a witness. The words tasted bitterly accurate in Maya's mouth. She felt the echo of the lawyer's email and the photograph from the trees merge, old caution and new threat aligning like ruts. Thunder pressed down hard enough to make the window glass tremble. She turned the page. The next entries were logistics. A map sketch of the well cap, a diagram of a pulley rig built from a ladder and a block, lines about magnet strength and rope knots. He wrote like a man talking to his future self, or to a granddaughter who hadn't been permitted his face. When your hands are smaller than fear, he wrote, build a lever. At the back of the journal lay a single loose sheet. It was a letter addressed in the same hand to her mother. I kept the last promise, it began. The money was stained. I washed it through time. I left it where time could keep washing until the stain ran clear. I thought I could come back when it was safe. I chose wrong. I am sorry for your birthdays without me. I am sorry for the ways silence became your inheritance. Maya sat very still and felt something unspool and something else tighten. The moral knot was the size of the room. Loot reclaimed from criminals was still loot until the law named it lawful. But the bank receipt, sealed, official, hinted at patience rather than plunder. Her grandfather had refused to cash the bonds until some statute had lifted like fog, waited for clean title, trusted the slow machinery of time to do what the fast machinery of men would not. A flash of lightning exposed a vehicle's silhouette down the road, idling. She clicked off her flashlight and let the storm's gray take over. In the dim, the journal's presence felt like a person. She could hear her students in her head, but is he a hero or a thief? And her own answer arriving, complicated and honest. He was a man in a corner, reaching for a door that didn't exist, so he drew one. The cabin's air cooled. She slid the journal into the canvas bag with the keys and the map, wrapped the bank receipt in plastic, and tied the bag's mouth tight. The second X waited at the well. Her hands itched to move, but the storm pressed no across the roof. She listened to that. The last lines she read before sleep found her sitting up were simple. If you receive this, take people with you. Bring a camera, bring a clock. The bank holds the final word. And beneath, in a hand that had finally let itself soften, the foundation shifts. The heart does not. Hold fast. Warning thinned the storm to a steady drip. Maya stood over the well cap with the map in her pocket and the journal's instructions repeating like breath. The iron plate was scarred, the welded ring solid. She'd brought rope, a step ladder, an old block and tackle she'd found in the shed, and a magnet meant for pulling nails from boards. When your hands are smaller than fear, build a lever. She rigged the ladder as a tripod, clipped the pulley to its crown, and threaded rope with knots practiced on a kitchen chair at dawn. The cap resisted, then grudgingly pivoted when she used a length of pipe as a cheater bar. Cold air lifted from the shaft, mineral and clean. She tied herself off with a waist loop, a teacher's belt repurposed as a harness, and lowered the magnet slowly, feeling each inch with her palm on the rope. Twice it clanged against stone. The third time a different sound answered, a soft, satisfied kiss of metal recognizing metal. She pulled hand over hand, the pulley halving the weight. A rectangle emerged wet with condensation, a metal case, dulled but intact, engraved with initials she knew only from absence. J.E. She set it on the grass and did not open it. Instead, she took out her phone, checked that a single bar had returned, and hit record. Date, time, location. She narrated her movements, the way she'd taught students to document lab work. Then she called Eli. By the time he reached the fence, a dust cloud rose on the road. Alan's SUV stopped too fast, gravel popping the ditch. He stepped out with a man in a blazer who didn't blink at the mud. The attorney. They walked like people who knew their names would be recorded in the minutes. "We're here to ensure proper handling," the attorney said. His voice carried the confidence of a man who had never had to prove his right to speak. Maya lifted the case with both hands and carried it to the porch table. "Thank you for coming," she said, letting the sentence choose neither welcome nor apology. "We'll open it together, on camera." She turned the phone so every hand stayed in frame. Eli folded his arms and took up a position that said witness without flourish. Alan's eyes fixed on the initials. He looked younger than she remembered, anger giving him age. If there's anything of value, it's part of the estate. The attorney cleared his throat as if to place a bookmark. All items discovered must be inventoried and preserved. Any attempt to conceal— "Let's open it," Maya said, cutting the lecture off at the hinge. She slid the rusted key into the lock, felt the teeth settle, and turned. The mechanism clicked with the patient relief of a door kept shut too long. Inside, there were bundles wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine, assay certificates in plastic sleeves, and on top, a notarized letter folded once. She lifted the letter first. The notary seal bore a date, 1979. The signature belonged to a trust officer. The text was written in her grandfather's hand, but witnessed by a bank. Funds derived from legal settlement of mining fraud. Payout held in trust, for descendants to repair what was broken. She exhaled a breath she hadn't noticed holding. The attorney slid a pair of reading glasses from his pocket and leaned closer. "Assay certificates are evidence, not cash. Bearer bonds, if valid, remain subject to chain of custody." He looked at the bundles. "We'll need to file for injunctive control pending judicial review." "Chain of custody means you want to take it," Maya said evenly. The phone camera framed his jaw tighten. "We will preserve everything. We will also verify." She untied one bundle. Inside, bearer bonds lay in precise stacks, numbers crisp despite time. Another bundle held court documents, a settlement agreement naming her grandfather as trustee for family beneficiaries. The words family beneficiary smoothed nothing and sharpened everything. Alan's face thawed, then stiffened again, the muscle memory of grievance returning to cover surprise. "This doesn't prove it's yours," the attorney said. "It proves there's something to fight over." He reached into a leather folder and produced a draft motion. "Injunction to seize contents until the court can determine proper distribution. If you refuse, we'll—" Maya felt the journal's sentence surface with the calmness of a lifeline. "The bank holds the final word." She picked up the bank receipt from the hearth tin, set it next to the letter, and let the attorney see the box number and the red word sealed. "We're not opening another thing here," she said. "The rest happens at the bank that sealed this, with their ledgers, with their retired officer, with compliance watching. Bring your motion, bring your camera, bring your certainty." She turned the phone back to herself, documenting her refusal to proceed without institutional verification. Alan rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture that looked like a man trying to wipe years off. His voice, when it came, had dropped its courtroom echo. "When do we go?" "As soon as they answer," Maya said. She dialed, put the call on speaker, and told the manager, in a tone that placed weight on each syllable, that they were coming with a sealed receipt, a notarized letter, and eyes on them. The manager asked for an hour. Eli broke the quiet. "I'll drive behind," he said. "Not because I don't trust you, because roads have corners." Maya closed the metal case and buckled it into the passenger seat like a person. She looked at the cabin, at the hearthstone shifted and waiting, at the drawing on the mantel, then locked the door. The foundation shifts, the heart does not. The third X on the map hovered in her mind like a promise deferred. First, the bank. Then, whatever waited under the bedroom floor would tell its part. The bank manager met them at the glass doors with the posture of a man who'd chosen caution as a career. He led them past posters about college savings into a conference room where blinds cut the light into obedient bands. A compliance officer took the far chair, tablet ready. The manager placed a leather ledger on the table like a family Bible. "You said you had a sealed receipt," he began. Maya slid it forward. The red stamp, sealed, sat like a boundary stone. The manager examined the box number, checked his ledger, and exhaled through his nose. This box was opened in 1979, then sealed under an internal hold. Authorization recorded by Trust Officer Harold Pike. No subsequent access. He looked at Maya. "We'll need Mr. Pike." They waited while the bank called the retired man back into his old life. Harold arrived in a wool coat that remembered winters, shoulders squared by decades of decisions. He listened without cutting in, then asked to see the receipt. His finger traced the stamp as if confirming a scar. "I remember this," he said. "Your grandfather refused to liquidate a single bond until a statute of limitations expired on the fraud that tainted the funds. He wanted everything clean. He made me promise to seal the box and log the conditions. We set the seal for a future heir who could prove relation and intent." Alan's attorney shifted. "Intent?" "To repair what was broken," Harold replied simply. He turned to the manager. "Let's open the vault." Downstairs, the air cooled into seriousness. The vault door moved on a scale that made human stubbornness look small. Inside, rows of metal boxes waited like quiet choir stalls. Harold found the correct number with unhurried certainty. 2 keys turned, bank and bearer, and the box slid forward with the sound of time agreeing to cooperate. They brought it to a counter at waist height. Cameras watched, compliance watched, the attorney watched in a way that could pass for stewardship. Maya watched like someone about to lift a lid on a story that had been writing itself without her. The box contained what the journal had promised: photographs, documents, and a signed settlement agreement. The photographs showed a circle of men and women around a folding table in a church basement. Faces earnest, hands ink-smudged from maps. The mining co-op in its hopeful phase. Another photograph captured a courtroom doorway. Her grandfather stepping into light he didn't seem to trust. Harold unfolded the settlement papers. "Here," he said, tapping a signature line. "Trustee designation, naming John Erickson as trustee for family beneficiaries, with explicit instructions for proportional distribution and a clause requiring a portion to be allocated to community repair." He glanced at Maya. "Your grandfather insisted. Money without mending wasn't money he wanted." The compliance officer glanced up. "We can authenticate signatures against our archives." She scanned, compared, nodded. All legitimate. A letter lay at the bottom, addressed to Maya's mother. The paper held decades in its fibers. Harold looked to Maya. "Do you want privacy?" She shook her head. The room was full of people who doubted and people who guarded. Let the letters stand in the same air. She unfolded it. "I chose silence when I should have chosen you. This trust is not an apology, it is a tool. Use it to pay what we owe each other and what we owe the town." The handwriting wavered on the last sentence, then steadied. "Tell the child I kept the last promise, even if I failed all the small ones." Maya kept her voice level. He names both obligations, family and community, in the trust and the letter. That aligns with the notarized instruction in the well case. Alan's jaw worked. He looked at the photographs too long. When he finally spoke, the bravado had drained. I thought he just left us. I didn't know there was this. He swallowed. I've been tight. Money's been tight. That's why The attorney cleared his throat as if to herd the moment back to process. We still need judicial oversight on distribution, the chain of custody, compliance interrupted with polite precision. Chain of custody is intact. The bank sealed the box and now witnesses its opening. The trustee designation and the settlements are authenticated. Distribution will be executed per instrument, with court notification, yes, but there's no basis to seize. Harold nodded once. We can initiate a transfer into a temporary trust account while counsel drafts the family trust instrument. We will also document the community allocation clause. He turned to Maya, gentler now. We'll need a plan. Equity among beneficiaries. A proposal for the community share. Scholarships, restoration, something tangible. Maya's eyes found the photograph of the co-op around the folding table. Restoration, she said, and education. The fund should carry the name he used in the margin, the last promise, so the story stays attached to the repair. Alan didn't argue. His shoulders eased a fraction, resentment loosening its grip to reveal fatigue. He looked at Maya, not through her. I can work with that, he said quietly. I don't want to fight if the paper says we don't need one. Harold slid forms forward. Signatures marked the start of a new container for old money. As pens moved, the letter's last line hung between them like a rail they both chose to hold. The bank manager gathered copies, compliance log chain of custody, and the vault door closed on a chapter that had finally been read aloud. Outside, the day had cleared to a thin winter blue. Maya stood on the steps with the ledger's weight lighter in her bag. The third X brightened in her mind. The bank had given them authentication, a path, and a demand. Build a plan that binds truth to repair. The foundation shifts, the heart does not. Now, the floorboard waiting back at the cabin would have its say. The thing about truth is it keeps asking for the next step. The bank had authenticated the past, now the map's third X called them home. Back at the cabin, the bedroom floor waited with its slightly proud plank, silver nails bright as unanswered questions. Maya set the ledger, the journal, and the bank's copies on the dresser. Then she knelt, slid the flat bar beneath the seam, and lifted. Beneath the board, not a vault, just a shallow recess lined with cedar. Nestled inside, wrapped in muslin, lay a small silver locket and a folded note brittle with time. Maya paused, aware of how small objects can carry ridiculous weight. She opened the note first, in that careful hand. For the girl who drew the sun. I could not be the man who sat at the table, but I kept my eyes on this place. When you are ready, open the locket. She eased the locket's hinge. 2 photographs blinked up. Her mother at 12, standing by the cabin steps with a grin that dared the world. And beside it, a baby in a knitted cap, cheeks solemn, eyes familiar. On the back of the second, a single word. Maya. The air left her in a sound she would never play back for any audience. He had stayed connected from the shadows. Not present, but not gone. Across town, Alan sat at her kitchen table with Eli between them like a mediator who preferred coffee to court. He listened as Maya read the note aloud. He touched the locket and flinched as if it were hot. I didn't get any of this, he said. When he left, we got holes. Seeing proof that he looked back, that he kept pieces. That does something ugly to the story I've told. He looked up. I'm sorry I came at you with lawyers before I came with questions. Maya didn't rush to forgive. In that moment, she modeled something quieter, an honest pause. Then she placed a bank settlement clause between them like a third voice. It requires a community share. The co-op towns were hurt when the fraud bled them. We fix our family ledger and theirs, both. That's the only version that sits right with what he wrote. They drove to Iron Ridge, where the mining museum lived in a building that had learned to be small. A curator with a name tag and tired eyes met them with suspicion that softened into interest as documents unfolded. She showed them photographs of union picnics, ledger pages in cramped hands, and a bulletin board with faces labeled Lost Pensions. When Maya described the settlement and the clause, the curator lifted a hand to her mouth. People have been trying to tell this story for decades, she said. No one had the paper to prove the harm, only the harm itself. Your paper matters. They walked the slag path where the co-op had posted its first sign. Wind carried the smell of last rain. Alan stopped and looked out over the ridge. We could take our piece, he said. Pay debts, call it a day. But he gestured at the museum. That would make us part of the older story. People leave with whatever they can carry. I don't want that. Back at the cabin, they drafted a plan at the same table where their grandfather had written codes and margins. The family trust would be transparent, quarterly reports public, distributions proportional and boring, because boring is how money stays honest. The community share would seed the last promise fund, scholarships for kids from the corridor, grants for land restoration where tailings still leached into creeks, a stipend to the museum to build an exhibit on the co-op's rise and betrayal. They added a line item that wasn't about repair but memory, an oral history project with elders who remembered the sound of hoppers at dawn. They signed their names to a draft that would become more formal under lawyers' pencils. Alan poured coffee and raised his mug in a small toast. To keeping promises in the light. He hesitated, then laughed once at himself. And to boring reports. At dusk, Maya returned to the cabin alone. She set the locket on the mantel beneath the child's drawing. In that room, grief and gratitude finally agreed to sit together. She read the journal's last page aloud, not for the bank, not for Alan, but for the walls that had been holding the story. I thought secrecy could be stewardship. I was wrong. Stewardship requires witnesses. In that moment, she understood her role. Not owner, not even heir. Steward. The difference was everything. She called the bank the next morning with their plan, then called the curator to schedule a meeting with the board. She spoke to a CPA about structures that would outlast both of them. On the ridge, winter revised the trees into lines. The cabin stood plumb enough. The foundation still shifted, as old timber does. But the heart, the choice to bind money to mending, held. The thing about legacy is it only becomes inheritance when you decide what to do with it. Maya had decided, and for the first time, the silence around her grandfather's name changed shape. It wasn't a wall anymore. It was a door, open. The announcement began small, as most avalanches do. A feature in the Iron Ridge paper framed it plainly. Assets authenticated, lawful origin traced to a mining fraud settlement. A family trust and the community fund created to repair what was broken. They ran a photo of Maya on the cabin steps, the locket bright against a wool collar. The caption didn't sell drama. It honored a ledger set right. By noon, regional outlets picked it up. Reporters asked for villains. Maya offered process. She showed them the bank's confirmations, the settlement, the clause earmarking funds for descendants, and for the corridor that it paid with pensions and land. The thing about honest paper is it makes spectacle look cheap. The story bent toward integrity because the documents did. Then, letters arrived. Former co-op workers' children wrote of dinner tables gone quiet when the mill closed, of parents who'd kept pay stubs like talismans. A man mailed a photograph of his father at a union rally, fist high, mouth open, mid-chant. He wrote, I thought he lost. Maybe he didn't lose completely. He folded a copy of the article inside. Institutions paid attention. The bank, eager to be on the right side of a historical reckoning, offered to sponsor a small exhibit on community-led resource projects. What worked, what failed, who paid the price. The Iron Ridge Museum's board, used to patching leaks with bake sales, found itself planning a gallery where school kids could place pins on a relief map, showing where ore had traveled and where wealth had stopped. A retired history teacher volunteered to script the panels. Maya smiled at the symmetry and offered to edit for commas. Within the family, the air changed. Alan came for dinner one quiet Thursday. He set a bottle of sparkling cider on Maya's table and kept his eyes off the locket on the mantel until they both looked. He lifted his glass. To keeping promises in the light, he said again, the sentence finding its shape in a softer mouth. They ate stew and apples and drafted a communication plan that would bore anyone not invested. Quarterly statements, audited. A website with line items and minutes. The antidote to rumor wasn't volume, it was clarity. Maya returned to the cabin as to an archive in a retreat. She cataloged each document in the journal's wake, scanning pages, storing originals in acid-free sleeves, logging context so meaning wouldn't evaporate when voices changed. She walked the ridge with a notebook, listing names for the oral history project the fund would seed. The union steward with the pine sap voice, the janitor who remembered which doors closed first, the school secretary who watched free lunch lists grow. She called, asked, listened. Stewardship requires witnesses. Not everything was applause. An anonymous message told her to leave sleeping ghosts alone. Another accused the fund of polishing a thief's legacy. She answered neither. The work itself would answer. She sat with the journal and the locket and the drawing that had waited half a century for someone to understand the word last. The foundation still shifted. The heart held. On a gray Saturday, the museum unveiled the first case, a simple arrangement of the settlement copy, the map with its 3 X's, a photograph of the co-op's folding table, and a touchscreen that let visitors read the clause that bound private benefit to public repair. Children tapped through the pages, learning a vocabulary older than their screens: assay, trustee, restitution. An elderly woman pressed 2 fingers to the glass over the locket's photograph and whispered, "I knew her when she sold raffle tickets at the church." The curator stepped back and let the room work. In the weeks that followed, checks cleared and invoices grew. A scholarship application portal opened with a single question at the top. What does repair mean where you live? A crew began planting willows along a creek that had run orange for decades. A high school student recorded her grandfather saying the names of men who had stood beside him in 1975, his voice breaking on the 4th. Maya kept her promise to herself. She would not let the story be reduced to a headline or a haul. She wrote a 2-page statement that closed every interview. Wealth may close debts. Only truth repairs the foundation. The thing about repair is it's visible. Come see. Then she went back to the cabin, set the hearthstone in place with both hands, and breathed into the quiet that was no longer silence. The hearthstone settled back, and with it, a promise finally kept. If this journey resonated, share a moment when you chose repair over convenience. Subscribe to Uncanny Remarkable Stories for more true-to-heart narratives where ordinary lives unlock extraordinary legacies. And watch next, an attic map leading to a century-old vow kept at last, because our foundations remember.